Hey everybody, Karl Hughes from the Podcast Consultant here, and today I want to talk about something that is coming up more and more in my client calls, and I think it's a really good question, and that is, why should we move our podcast from audio to video? Is now the right time to do it? What's going to be involved in it? And I'm going to answer some of those questions today. I'm not going to go into a full tutorial about how to transfer a complete podcast from audio format to video at this point. But that said, if that's something you'd like to see in the future, please leave a comment below. I would love to hear about it. And so I can record more videos that are helpful for people out there running their own podcasts and looking to switch into video. Let's get started. So first thing to understand is that podcasting has grown exponentially in the last 20, 30 years from a super niche kind of like specialized thing. I remember first listening to This American Life in podcast format when I was younger, and it was a unique experience. Most people didn't know what podcasts were. A lot of the phones didn't come bundled with podcast players by default. And iTunes changed that. And obviously now podcasts are a well-known entity in the world of media. And so podcasts have traditionally been an audio format, but there's always been people who rode the line between audio, video, and sort of have converted shows over to video over time. And then in the last 5 or 6 years, I think the explosion of YouTube and then short form video has encouraged even more people to explore video as an avenue. And so it's worth talking about why we want to make this transition, or why we would or wouldn't want to make this transition, and some of the things involved, some of the considerations, some of the challenges you're going to face. So let's start off by talking about why video content is so compelling and why people might want to convert an audio show to video. And the first reason for this is that video content is a more powerful way to build a stronger relationship with an audience. A lot of human communication is nonverbal, and that nonverbal communication doesn't get picked up well in audio. I mean, you can kind of do it with pauses and dramatic effect. Adding music helps, of course, but not every show goes through the process of doing that for just a simple interview show. And so one reason to move towards video is to build a stronger relationship with your audience and build those nonverbal cues so that people who are watching get a little more out of the show than they would and feel a little closer to you as a host than they would if they were just listening. And so that's the first reason that I would consider moving to video, is just to build stronger relationships. What I've always liked about podcasting as a medium is that it really focuses on having a small, committed, and strong relationship with your audience. And what I mean by small, I mean not every show is small, obviously, but the majority of shows don't attract millions of listeners, right? And that's fine for podcasting. But the truth is, even if you have a small audience, if they're strong and committed and they really want to support and back whoever they're listening to as the host and the guests, then you can get a lot of value out of a podcast. Same is true with a video podcast. And so when you add video to your show, you're giving the audience a new opportunity to connect with you as a host, and you're allowing yourself to build those deeper connections with listeners. Next, let's talk about expanding your reach. So YouTube is the elephant in the room here, but I think we're also seeing more and more interest in TikTok, Reels by Instagram, and YouTube Shorts, which are all short form video. Now, let's talk about them in two separate contexts because they are a little different. So YouTube tends to favor mid-length video for the most part. So that's going to be anywhere from 10 to 45-minute long videos. So that's a good length for a typical podcast. And if you're going to move to video, you want to be able to leverage YouTube as a channel. Now, of course, if you're doing longer, that's fine. If you're doing much shorter, that's fine too. But I think in general, you kind of want to meet the algorithm's expectations. So for shows that are in that 30, 45-minute, maybe an hour-long range, moving to video is a great option. I think it's a really natural fit for YouTube's typical audience. There are some things to consider there, like making sure you've got good thumbnails and titles and descriptions so that things can get found on YouTube. YouTube is probably the second biggest search engine after Google, and Google favors YouTube results in many cases. So it's a really great opportunity for SEO. But it also just has a committed listener base in general. I read a stat recently that something like 40% of people prefer to listen to podcasts on YouTube. And I've seen more and more people putting YouTube on in the kind of background as their podcast player. So while it's not its intended use case, it's certainly a use case that is happening more and more. And I think that's just going to drive more and more podcasts to have a presence there. I'll say one other thing is that a lot of shows we worked with in the last few years have moved to audio only, but on YouTube. So they'll put like a static image, maybe it's the cover art for the show up as the visual, and then just have two people talking on the YouTube video. I think that's okay. That's a start, but it's definitely not as engaging, and it's not native feeling content, which is what YouTube really wants. The big thing to think about here is production value as well. As more and more shows are going to YouTube and to video formats, the production value sort of bar is going a little higher for that video work. And so if you're not doing any post-production editing, you're not adding frames, you're not adding bugs, you're not adding the kind of flashy transitions between things when it makes sense to, if you're not doing animated intros and outros, all that stuff adds up together and goes a long way to make your show look more professional and like you know what you're doing. And again, we're going back to the point of a podcast and a video podcast is to build trust. And the more you can make it seem like it's an effort that you really care about, that you're trying to craft and build a message for your audience, the more the audience tends to respect you as a host and tends to build that trust faster. So I would go back to thinking about video podcasting as a way to enhance trust. And what do you need to do that? You have to fit the medium that you're putting it out on, YouTube being the key one here. Now, the other mediums that we kind of touched on are social media platforms, short form social media platforms like TikTok, Instagram, Reels, and YouTube Shorts. Now, if you're going to be doing videos for those, you could do native content, certainly, but I think another good way to get kind of double dip off your podcast content is to take short clips from the podcast, the video version of the podcast, and put it out on these other platforms, along with captions. You can throw B-roll in, music, and things like that to enhance the production value. That said, you need to have some source material, and that's where the podcast can be really helpful. So in an hour-long podcast, you might get 2 to 20 short clips that you could put out there onto social media, depending on how tight your show is and how much value you're driving in every single episode. But it's definitely worth considering because these platforms are growing really fast. And even platforms like LinkedIn and Twitter, which have been traditionally non-video or non-visual, are starting to put more video into the feeds. And so it's something that's worth considering no matter where your audience lives. And then last but not least, as far as reasons to move to video, are the monetization opportunities. So for a lot of creators who are trying to monetize their podcast, especially indirectly, video can be really helpful because it allows you to showcase products or to visually add sort of cues or pointers to different products that you want to promote. And this can be really natural if you are a person who's got a podcast that is, say, about certain products, whether it's something like a consumer good, like you're reviewing shoes or eyeglasses or sunglasses or something like that, or you're in a more business space and you're reviewing software. You want to be able to show users that software. And so I think this is something to consider depending on the sort of focus and format of your show. But it can also be nice if you're interviewing, say, somebody who owns a software company, to show screenshots of that company's work or their sort of website and homepage and how it works, can all add more value to listeners or viewers of the show, as well as giving you more opportunities to monetize and ideally make more per viewer when it comes to those revenue opportunities. But moving to video is not without its trade-offs. So there are some challenges that are going to come up for any show that moves from audio format to video or adds video as a secondary channel. And let's talk about some of those. The first is the equipment costs. So the range here is going to vary quite a bit, much like it does on the audio side. Obviously, if you're familiar with buying audio post-production equipment or buying microphones, buying all the mixers and things, then you kind of know what you're in store for. But if you're not familiar with this process, going to video is going to take a little bit more. The first thing is you're going to need a decent camera or webcam. I'll say that it doesn't have to be a $2,000 camera to do pretty good work, especially if your format of your show is just a host and guest format, because often you can't control the guest's equipment very well. So I recommend for most shows starting off to get something like a decent webcam. Make sure it's placed about your eye level. Make sure you get a couple decent lights behind the webcam and off to the side so you get some fair lighting. And then a lot of the other issues can be fixed in post-production if you've got those baseline setups. Of course, you also have to have a microphone because you are going to be recording audio. Definitely recommend something external and something that is good enough audio quality that it's not going to be suffering there. The other big cost you're going to be coming into is the technical work around post-production and editing. So when fixing audio and editing audio in post-production, it's slightly easier and faster to work with than video. Couple of reasons for this. One is the larger file sizes in video just take more time to process, pre-process, post-process, upload, download, all the little steps that have to happen there, right? So there's no way around that. The other issue is that editing is a little trickier when you're working in video because you can't just cut around things quite as easily because there can be visual sort of hiccups between this. So you want to be a little more careful when editing video. But that said, it's of course something you can outsource out to other companies. I mean, this is what we do at the Podcast Consultant. It's one of our main lines of business is doing this kind of post-production on video work. So it's certainly something you can find agencies like us to work with, or you can learn if you are a DIYer. The other thing that you have to think about is the way that content will sort of work on video formats. So some shows are especially tricky to convert to a video format. For example, narrative shows, which are more like documentaries, can be very tough to move to video because you then have to find B-roll and video footage for all the same content you would have had just audio for. So I don't necessarily recommend it for every show. Sometimes the costs don't outweigh the benefits, but I do for the broad majority of interview style shows, one-on-one interview style shows. I would say moving to video is a good move and will probably help you in the long run. You're going to be able to build that audience in places like YouTube. You're going to get more short form content that you can put onto the video native channels or on LinkedIn or Twitter. You're going to be able to build a deeper relationship with your audience, build trust faster by showing your face, having nonverbal cues, and you have other potential ways to monetize the show. So I think all that said, it's worth exploring video if you're today doing an interview style show and you're wondering if this is something that you should do, because the cost is not that high and the upside is potentially really great. If you have questions about starting a video podcast or converting an audio podcast over to video, I'm always happy to help. You can find me at thepodcastconsultant.com, and I look forward to hearing more of your feedback and questions in the comments.